Thanks, Abby, for the opportunity, and thanks for squeezing me a chance and in the program. I know I was to present with my fellow NGO guys yesterday, but wasn't feeling well. At least I can speak today. My presentation is on lessons from Lamu and Kwale County special plans. And as you can see on that first slide, somebody is asking if we followed the Marine special plan, and the other one is saying they lost their copy. I think we should depart from the point of commencing our MSP process for Kenya with the end in mind. How are we going to have it? Do we want a 1,000-page document? I saw a 2-page special plan in one of the districts in South Africa and Eastern Cape. And the first page was a simple map showing the zones of the district. And the second page was the do's and the don'ts and the policies and management guidelines of the spaces. And therefore, we should think about simplifying this so that we can get it right and have it as a document that people don't lose, but they can carry it around with them. Next slide, Abby. I'm not going to define the MSP because you can Google it, and many of my fellow panelists and earlier presenters already gave definitions of the MSP. But while it is important to know that MSP is an adaptive process, a special tool, a way of bringing people and see users together, and it's forward-looking, perhaps it's much more important to understand what MSP isn't. It isn't a silver bullet. I don't know what silver bullets do, but I think they are supposed to be solutions to all the problems that people have. And therefore, MSP is not one of them. It's not also a conservation plan, and it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. And it's not simply about technology and data. I know the way MSP is always presented is that it's so fancy, it's full of technology, and yeah, it's good because it's really full of technology. And unlike the planning of terrestrial spaces, MSP is talking about spaces where you cannot be able to, for example, put physical beacons. And therefore, for you to be able to plan it, then you have to virtually organize your beacons, and you cannot always have floating beacons. And to be able to also enforce the regulations and the guidelines for the management of the sea spaces, then you have to use technology, satellite, GPS. But that's not about it, and it's about so many other things, and colleagues have been able to bring them out. Next. Many of us have spoken about the geographic scope of MSP. I just threw that slide in there to talk about some of the scopes that we will be looking at in terms of the MSP work, and looking at the internal waters and the internal territorial sea of 12 nautical miles, the contiguous zone of a further 12 nautical miles, and then the EEZ of 200 nautical miles from the baseline, that's the internal waters, and which can extend, of course, to the continental shelf. There are a few countries that have been allowed to manage their sea spaces up to the continental shelf because they have shown that they have good practice in doing this. That's, for example, the islands of Mauritius and Seychelles. And it's because they have shown that you can co-manage the marine spaces. Perhaps the most critical thing about spatial planning in general, and perhaps marine spatial planning in particular, is the fact that it's an objective way of planning the distribution of activities. And perhaps for coastal areas, the populations in order to promote sustainable development. And to do this objectively, you should never think about the ownerships. If it is on the terrestrial space, you should not think about the land tenure. If it's in the marine space, you should not talk about who owns which space and who doesn't own, to prevent issues, for example, the conflict that we have between Kenya and Somalia, and the one between Kenya and Uganda in Mijingo Islands, where one country thinks that the waters are in a different country, but all the fish stocks in that water belong to the other country. The reason is because you are fighting over the ownership of spaces instead of looking at the most objective and optimized use of those spaces. And if you do that, if you manage a space in terms of the most optimum use of that space, and then discuss how to benefit jointly from the resources from those spaces, then you'll be able to be given the continental shelf to manage. And so the issues of capacity will come in, of course, in the case study of Lamu and Kwale that I'm shortly getting into. It's the counties that WWF has been supporting to carry out special plans do not have capacity at all to do the 200 nautical miles of the EEZ. But then how much of this space we tried to do with these counties, 12 nautical miles of the territorial sea, but still there are challenges even of enforcing the guidelines and the provisions in those spaces. I know the country has formed a few authorities. We have the Kenya National Space Agency. We now have the Coast Guard, but even from the name, it's just the coast. And so going into the EEZ remains a challenge. And as we continue with these workshops, then building capacity and looking forward how we can enhance the capacities to be able to administer these areas. After the continental shelf is what Yvonne spoke about, the area beyond national jurisdiction. I know the US and China are good at conflicting in the South China Sea. These are people who have the capacity and have been able to administer even up to the areas beyond national jurisdiction. And so as we speak about commencing the MSP process in Kenya, we think about how far we can go with the capacities and how we can exchange with the other countries. Next. So what's a good MSP? I think this has been spoken about. It should be backed by legislation. We should start with the early involvement of the stakeholders, and it should have independent environmental assessments and policies based on environmental constraints. Should support the establishment of MPS and address cumulative impacts. And as Judith Nyunja said earlier, there should be a proper implementation framework and an M&E strategy that establishes authorities that will be able to monitor achievements in terms of the provisions of the MSP. Next. So as we did the Lamu and the Kwale County Special Plan, and currently working under some grant from the Nairobi Convention to also improve the draft Kilifi County Special Plan under the WIOSAP project. We are carrying out these activities by engaging stakeholders at all levels, meeting the politicians, one-on-one meetings, phone calls, public drop-in sessions, and consultations and reports, etc. And getting everybody involved, and not just by signing the participants list, but by truly understanding the implications of them accepting the zoning of their spaces in the final plans. Next. The MSP hype, and it's not just the media hype, but the hype by ourselves as experts in this field. I just dropped this because I hope that we don't remain, and I hope that we have passed already the peak of inflated expectations and have come out from the trough of disillusionment because things have not happened. And through these workshops and literature and many other engagements, that we emerge and get into the slope of enlightenment and get to understand and move out from this chaotic, too much information that's not helpful, and get into the plateau of productivity, and hence move slowly into the actual establishment of MSP for our country. Next. I'm moving a bit quickly because of time. I realize we are issues why do we need or want MSP, and I think this has been spoken about by Pascal and many other speakers to find space for new activities. And Pascal said that it's good to do it before there is so much footprint on our EEZ, so that we can get it right from the beginning. The blue economy, developing it, and it's great that the PS spoke about this yesterday. And blue economy is intrinsically sustainability in itself, and we hosted the workshop recently. And so developing that blue economy in a sustainable manner, and that's why we need to plan the spaces that we have in the ocean. Safeguarding and designing MPS and resolving user environment conflicts. You know, when we speak about EEZ, it's exclusive economic zone. It's not exclusive environmental zone. And so the economy is already taking care of itself, but we really need to think about the societies at the coast. We need to think about the environment. And so as we did the Lamu and Kwale special plans, the point of departure was ecosystem-based approach, the ICZM, and to be able to consider the environment for sustainability. Next. And so using environment as evidence, and then Judith did justice to this earlier, descriptively taking baselines and presenting the current state and predicting the potential, and then eventually integrating them. Next. So that's it in short, just a summary of it, describing the present and establishing the baseline, and knowing what our current status is, the ecologies and all this, the footprint, the shipping lines, the oil and gas concession, the extractives industry as a whole, establishing all that as a baseline so that we know where we are starting from. And number two, next. Looking into the future, the potential negative change to present state. What are the sensitivities and vulnerabilities, the impacts, the potential positive change to the present state? Because MSP is about change, it's a dynamic process. Which areas or species are sensitive? and where are the opportunities for protection and restoration if these have been converted or heavily impacted. Next. Lastly, number 3 is to bring it all together. So spatially and temporally, in terms of time, how long, for example, are we going to prepare this spatial plan for how many years, and what's the temporal resolution? I think in my MSP boundary slide, I spoke about the spatial resolution, and then we need the temporal resolution. Bring it all together. When is this plan going to come for review? When is it going to come for revision and all that, and the legal frameworks that are going to set it up, and when is it going to be said to have been approved and to be legally binding to parties and to be used to resolve conflict and to be used by private citizens to sue where the law has been plowed and places where one space use is encroaching into the other provision, and so coming up to litigate all these, and so having all those, integrating all those policies in a simple map that's going to show the spatial explicitness of these spaces, the policies governing them, the approving authorities, and all this, and the relevant legislation that will guide the process, so that it doesn't just become a tick the box activity, but then it becomes eventually something that's really binding on parties, both nationally, sub-regionally, and regionally, etc. Next. So I said the Lamu case, and I think Dr. Valentine Ochanda presented this yesterday, was we divided the groups, the working groups, the thematic groups into 3 themes: the environmental theme, the economy theme, and the social and infrastructure theme. And the environment zoned out the entire county and up to roughly 10 kilometer of distance into the sea, and each group or each thematic area came up with the zoning of all that space as per their aspirations and their needs. And then after doing all that, so this was the environment theme that came up with all these critical ecologically significant areas, classifying all the categories of these to be used in the give and take, in the trade-offs, in the negotiations. And then the economic sector or theme, agriculture, tourism, livestock, and using the matrix of compatible and non-compatible users that Pascal presented earlier, came up with all these, and then we overlaid them. And through a give and take, a trade-off, a negotiation, justification, after we did natural capital inventory of the assets and did valuation of ecosystem services to justify the defense for the environmental assets. So this was brought together into an integrated map, and then the disputes resolved by the groups to arrive at the final and optimum land use that and CUs that you can see on the next slide. Next, Abby. So then eventually we had the structure plan, which was optimizing the uses It's not very clear. Those of you who will be interested, we can share the high resolution maps and even GIS files of this. If you want, we can direct you to download them from WWF portal, and then you can use them for your analysis and see the details of the zoning. That was a result of very rigorous stakeholder-led process with the academia, with the UN agencies, UN Habitat, and so many other NGOs and government bodies. And so eventually it was the first county special plan to be launched in the country. And so we are in the process of the implementation and trying to see what works and what's not working, and supporting the county to continue the adaptive management process to ensure that lessons are documented and shared. Next. Same thing with the Kwale County, critical ecologically significant areas. I think Pascal presented the Shimoni Vanga area, and this was covered well, I think, with some of the data that was shared by Pascal and colleagues. And so this was also zoned through ecosystem-based services. In the next slide, you will see that we did a valuation of ecosystem services and used it as justification for the zoning by the on this environmental fact. You can see the wildlife corridors in the terrestrial part of the county spatial plan. And so that again, the point of departure was the ecosystems, and therefore ensuring that we speak for the environment and people, because the economy can always speak for itself. Next. So that was the ecosystem services, providing the role of ecosystems in Kwale County. And you will be able to see the contributions of the different ecosystem services and how they will change under the status quo, business as usual, good management and effective management over the next 20 years. Next. Then we integrated and came up with the structure plan, or the county special structure for Kwale as well, to some 12 nautical miles, but we still working on seeing exactly how this could be implemented as we were. This is a plan that is due to be launched shortly for Kwale, and then we work on the enforcements and the implementation and see what works and what doesn't. Next. So that's my last slide, and from the experience working with these counties with the limited capacities that are there, and trying to provide a capacity building plan into the future. And the conclusion is that it is better to have an MSP than to just manage our marine spaces by hook and crook or by chance. And MSP is about people and politics as much as we talk about data and technology. And where possible, let's use ecosystem-based approaches together with the EICZM approach to ensure that environmental sensitivities are taken care of, even as our blue economy, our economies of the sea are evolving. And if stakeholders are involved from the beginning, the MSP has a much better chance of succeeding. What we've been doing with the counties is to work with the sectors and have full sectoral participation and have full sectors bringing in all their projects and the implementation frameworks, phasing them out, including capital investment plans, so that it is these same sectors then that will work with the citizens of the different places or counties to ensure that there is success in implementing them. And we encourage that MSP becomes ecosystem based so that its sustainability is improved. Thank you.